Okay, are we ready? Who's setting up the video?
Tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. A seed planted today takes root and grows into a tree that bears fruit in the future. Over 110 years ago, a seed was planted. Today, that seed, the idea of excellence, has grown into the University of Pretoria, South Africa's largest contact research-intensive university. 9 faculties and a business school are spread across 7 beautiful campuses, which are home to over 50,000 students, ready to make an impact in the world beyond university and join our global network of nearly 300,000 alumni. Future-focused, sustainably developed facilities and cutting-edge multi- and transdisciplinary research are underpinned by a desire to transform lives and have a positive impact on communities and the world. Excellence in teaching, learning, research and innovation, arts and culture, and sports puts us firmly amongst the world's best universities. Knowledge is not just what is in books. It is the wisdom to apply it, to nourish and nurture the seed so that it takes root, grows tall, bears fruit, and branches out. UP plants that seed, that tiny bit of curiosity, creativity, critical thinking, hope, the desire to care, respect, help, and innovate against all odds, to grow, to leave your mark, to excel, to challenge the norm, to think, to rethink, to discover, to inquire, to lead, to have courage, to make a difference, and to persevere. This is the University of Pretoria. We make today and every day matter.
Welcome to the University of Pretoria. Welcome especially to our Future Africa campus, which is one of our new campuses at the university, and really our pride and joy, the crown jewel of the university, and a place that we hope to fill with dialogue and engagement and a lot of intellectual engagement like we're going to be having tonight. And so thank you very much for all being here. Welcome also to everyone who's joining us at the universities as soon as we've got them on screen. My name is Dr. Stemble Mbete. I'm a lecturer here at the University of Pretoria in the Department of Political Sciences, and I will be your program director this evening. And I will be also the moderator of the debate that we are all here to hear tonight. I would like to welcome some special guests who are here. Ms. Futim Toba, the chairperson of council, thank you so much for being here. Ambassador Mokbane, thank you for being here as well. And then, of course, to our host tonight, Professor Tawana Kupe, our Vice Chancellor and Principal at the University of Pretoria. And a big welcome to Dr. Precious Moloi Motsepe, who is the founder of the Motsepe Foundation. And the reason why we are all here, the Motsepe Foundation is facilitating a number of these university dialogues on a number of different issues, and we were glad as the University of Pretoria to be hosting the dialogue for Women's Month, which is a dialogue on gender and feminist government. Before we start with the debate, I would like to firstly, a few housekeeping things. There are toilet facilities outside. If you go out this door to your left, it's all signposted. Please put your phones on silent. And I won't say switch them off, because in these days of Twitter, everyone is wanting to tweet. So you don't have to switch them off, but please do put them on silent. The hashtag that we're using for Twitter is UniDialogue. hashtag UniDialogues, and the Motsepe Foundation Twitter account, which will be live tweeting, is Motsepe FOUNDTN, so foundation without the ION. And the UP Twitter page is UPTux, at UPTux, so you can tweet us from there as well. Before we start, I would also like to let you know that the audience is going to be voting on this debate. For people who are watching from the other university venues and also from who will be live streaming, please will you vote on Slido, SLID.O. You can either download the app or use the website. You will find the link on the Motsepe Foundation Twitter page, and that'll allow you to participate in the debate. The password for us is hashtag B446, but you will find all of that information on Twitter. Also, before I forget, let me welcome our colleagues from UCT. Hi. Welcoming them, they are led by Dr. Cyan Elves, who's from the director for who's the director of the Office for Inclusivity and Change. Welcome, thank you very much for joining us. The University of Free State with Professor Puleng Lenkapule Bula, who is the Vice Rector for Student Affairs and Stakeholder Relations. And last but not least, our neighbors at WITS. Hi, guys. Led by Ms. Charlene Bierkes, who's the Director of Gender Equity at WITS University. Thank you very much for joining us. Without further ado, I'd like to call upon Professor Tawana Kupe, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Pretoria, to make some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Stembile Mbeta, Program Director. You have done much of the work of the protocol, but so our mind will be limited. I would like to welcome, especially our Chair of Council, Ms. Futim Toba. She, for those who don't understand, she is the person who can fire me. Then, and Ambassador Fikinya Maguvane, her guest, and of course, my co-host and the founder of this initiative, Dr. Precious Moloi Motsepe. Thank you very much for choosing UP. UP, we have this slogan now, choose UP, for choosing UP to be a host in partnership with our colleagues. And welcome also to our colleagues at Wits University, Free State, and University of Cape Town. I think this initiative is important in relation to the notion that it is a dialogue. I think that dialogue is something that is sorely lacking in universities, and one would have thought that that should not be the case, given that the creation of knowledge, especially that kind of knowledge that brings greater insight into social and other issues, which can translate into action in addressing those, should be core to what a university does. So from where I stand as the Vice Chancellor and Principal at University of Pretoria, I see this as the beginning of multiple dialogues universities will carry out on the pressing issues of the day, the big local and global challenges, and that in doing so, through dialogue, we're able to co-create the knowledge that will bring insight and translate into transforming lives, transforming communities, and transforming our country, South Africa, transforming our continent, Africa, and making a contribution to the world. And let me end by saying the following. Dialogue means, of course, that you have to listen and be listened to, and that in that space of listening to, the light of knowledge, insight is co-created and takes us further. So thank you very much, Dr. Moloi Motsepe, for actually asking universities to do what they should do, which is to dialogue, create knowledge, and change our societies. I hope everybody is going to enjoy this dialogue, and there are more to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. I would now like to call upon Dr. Moloi Motsepe to address us.
you. Thank you, Dr. Mbete. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be at University of Pretoria today. Thank you, Professor Coupe, for hosting us today. UP has a very special place in my heart. You know, this is where Pretoria area is where my husband comes from. So my in-laws are from Pretoria. And University of Pretoria, you washed my son up, gave him a degree. He graduated at this university last year. So this university is very, very close to my heart. Thank you very much. And I'm excited that some of the colleagues that we've been working with at Free State, Professor Puleng, thank you so much for all the hard work that you did in helping us bring this to fruition. Thanks to UCT and Wits University is where I graduated, so I'm glad that they are part of this debate. And Prof and Dr. Mbete, you did the hard work in getting us to where we are today. And I would just want to say that from the perspective of the foundation, we started the foundation with Patrice and I started it many years ago, actually after we finished university, because we felt that there were so many people that helped us to be where we are, who helped us in our education, our parents, the community, our teachers, university lecturers. And we felt that the bit that we could do was to give back to our society, give back to our people, and hence the university bursaries that we sponsor universities throughout South Africa with. And so this dialogue, these debates, coming together as universities like this is just part of the work that we believe we should be doing in helping with the development of our country, of the continent, and of the world. As Prof said, bringing our minds together, thinking through issues together, and co-creating solutions that are formulated by academia and students in university spaces that can then go on to contribute towards policy in our country, but also especially to make sure that universities are where they should be in the communities that they come from, that we should be helping to shape dialogue within the spaces outside of our campuses. So thank you very much to everybody that has agreed to be part of the dialogue, and we look forward to a very exciting debate. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Precious. I think that as both of our speakers have said, to have this kind of opportunity, not only for dialogue within the university, but with different universities, is quite a rare opportunity, even though it shouldn't be. And so we're really thankful to the Motsepe Foundation for setting this, for giving us this opportunity to engage with each other in this way. So let me explain to you what we're going to be doing today. So the format of today's discussion is a debate. And it's a debate on a fairly controversial motion, which is that the House believes that South Africa requires a feminist government to advance gender equity and equality across all sectors of society. Now, as a debate, and I was very happy to be able to be part of organizing this as a former debater myself, we are going to have two teams that are going to debate for the motion, and another team is going to oppose the motion, and then the audience, so all of you here in the auditorium, but everyone who's joining us from the other universities, and anybody live streaming or following with us on social media, will have an opportunity to vote. And so you will decide which team has successfully persuaded you one way or the other in the motion. We are going to vote twice. And the first lot of voting will happen before the speakers even start speaking, so that we can have a sense of what everyone thinks about the topic right now. And then we're going to do the second vote at the end of the debate, after the speakers have spoken, so that we'll have a sense of which team managed to persuade the most number of minds, and who has changed their mind, and we will, and so you'll all have a chance to vote again, and the team that has persuaded the most number of people to their side wins. Okay, so before I call up the teams, can we do the first vote? My counters, are you available? Yes, good. In the auditorium, the vote that is on the motion, South Africa requires a feminist government to advance gender equity and equality across all sectors of society. Those who vote yes, ooh. Must I say it again? Okay, South Africa requires a feminist government to advance gender equity and equality across all sectors of society. Okay. Timekeeper? Oh. Okay, do we have it? Okay, who says no? Yes? Okay. And those of you who are joining us from the other universities or on live stream, you can vote on Slido, and we will collect that online. We won't announce what the results were until the very end. So I would now like to call upon our teams. On the proposing team, I would like to call Mr. David Kabwa, who is the president of the SRC of the University of Pretoria. And he will be joined by his teammate, Ms. Mane Bukanyo, who is a female activist and a feminist activist, and UP alumni, who also is one of our colleagues at the university. Please give them a round of applause. Can you have a seat on the blue chairs? And then to sit on the grey chairs, I would like to invite Ms. Uleboheng Silebi, who is a lecturer at the University of Pretoria and is a renowned speaker on women and gender issues. And she will be part of the opposing team, together with her colleague, Ms. Sophia Aesop, who is a student in the Department of Political Sciences and is a renowned debater, one of the leaders of our Model UN Society on campus. Thank you. Okay, before they start, what we wanted was to provide, before we get into the mess of the debate, what we wanted was to provide an opportunity for the experts from the other universities to weigh in with their explanation, to give us some context of the topic and of the issues that we'll be dealing with today. So, Professor Puleng Lenka Bula, hi, can you hear us?
Good evening.
Hi, Prof. Puleng. we are ready for your contextual remarks. What we're going to have is that Professor Buleng, Ms. Bierkes, and Dr. Alves are going to provide us with a context of the topic and raise some issues that they hope will be picked up on by the speakers on the panel. So, Professor Buleng, over to you.
Good evening to all the participants, students, and those who are going to frame the issues. I'm really delighted that as the four universities, we are able to engage on a very topical theme, the idea of a feminist state. My understanding is that any conscious society would like to draw for itself ideas around feminism. And for me, feminism is the articulation of the dignity of women and men in our society, in the socio-political, economic, and other systems. This implies that the role that men and women would play would actually be valued in similar ways. And therefore, if this is an aspiration that we would like to work toward, what would be the criteria that we think is imperative for a feminist state? So I want to give a few examples. One, I think feminist scholars would suggest that there must be gender equality, there must be dignity for all citizens, there must be access to opportunities that allow knowledge systems, economic systems, as well as rights or access to justice to be manifest. In a feminist state, it would seem to me that we would have to have different understanding of economic distribution. Economic distribution not only measured in the gross national product, which is merely a measurement of how much we've produced, how much investments have come from foreign investors, and how much consumption was made. Instead, we would extend such criteria for economic development to entail what is the quality of air that we have, how do we contribute to ecological enrichment instead of ecological degradation? How do we ensure that the questions that wound societies, such as violence against women, rape culture, muting of the voices of women in policy making, are not encouraged? And I think this criteria for me would be important because it would mean a feminist state would be sensitive to the communities, it would value work, because in the current conjuncture, work that is valued is that which is paid for, but work at home is often not quantified or even valued. And these are some of the feminist questions around the value of life, around economics, that need to be put in place. Finally, I think in the context of higher education, because we are universities, a feminist state would finance higher education, enable access for students to perform optimally, ensure that talented students and academics are allowed to contribute constructively to the innovative systems of universities of South Africa, of the African continent, and a global community, and that it does not negate technologies, systems of knowledge that are promoted by women in particular. And it ought also to ensure that patriarchy as the disabling systems against the moral agency, activities and actions of women are not discontinued. So it is really in that space that I think if we think about a state that is life-affirming, that allows women and girls to grow and to contribute optimally to the social, economic, and other related aspects. Therefore, such a state would allow us to smile and to be happy, and happiness in a philosophical sense, not just the nice sense. So I hope the deliberations would take into cognizance that
Thank
a
you.
feminist debate would be led also by a woman with sensibilities to this criteria, not a woman who's willing to promote patriarchy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Professor Lenkabula. I would now like to call on Ms. Bierkes to continue with her remarks. Hi, guys at WITS. WITS, guys, can you see us, hear us? We can see you.
Sorry,
Hi.
can you hear it?
Yes, we can
Sorry
hear you.
about that. Just to say that I think that Prof. Lenkabula has covered a lot of what we were going to say as well. And that perhaps, as for WITS, we'd like to hear more on how the policies would look feminist. I think it's easy to say, let's have feminist policy, but what does that look like practically? An example would be our health policies should perhaps change to include free sanitary hygiene products to young girls and women so that they're not missing school and work once a month. We should be looking at things like maternity and maternity so that the burden of childcare doesn't continue to fall on female partners in society. So it is that a feminist government is not to say we are operating to the exclusion of men, but that men work to ensure an equitable lifestyle for women, so that women can be making the same life choices they can be making without the fear of losing an income, of violence, as Prof. Lenkabula said earlier, of not getting the same quality education, although having access, because of something like menstruation. And so we would like to hear how practically a feminist government would operate, not just in theory with our fancy catchphrases, but how do we actually say, here is how we improve the lives of women, young girls, queer community members, throughout the implication of, through the implementation of policies, a lot of which exist and are just failing to be implemented in a feminist way. So yeah, that would be our contribution. We're looking forward to the debate.
Okay, thank you so much. So we've had two sets of contributions. Firstly, the first one from Prof. Lenkabula, focusing on the thematic, the theoretical, some of the ideological issues involved in this debate. And Wits then bringing us back, Ms. Bierkes saying, well, how do we think of this practically? What are the practical policies that would need to be implemented that are different from what's currently being implemented that would make a feminist government come alive? And last but not least, UCT, hi guys. UCT is my alma mater, so it's very nice to see you. Can we get your views, please, Dr. Alves?
Thank you. Good evening, Vice Chancellor Professor Kupe and Dr. Precious Motsepe and audience members. Thank you for the opportunity to participate. I will attempt not to repeat what my colleagues from WITS and UFS have shared in their opening remarks, but to rather expand and complement their offerings. I think it's important to look back a bit at the post-1994 democratic government and the structures that were created as a deliberate attempt to enable the important inclusion of gender work into mainstream governance. The South African government at that time had arguably one of the most comprehensive sets of structures on the continent and in the world, which includes up until today, the Commission for Gender Equality, as well as the Ministry for Women, Youth, and People with Disabilities. So the motion that's proposed today is an important one because it intentionally or perhaps unintentionally initiates the feminist approach, which is to critique the status quo in order to change the system. And in starting this conversation, we must first understand why feminism, as opposed to any other epistemological paradigm, would advance the important demands of gender equality and equity. And I'm sure that the students that are participating today would provide this rationale. And so for the purpose of this dialogue, I think I'd like to raise 4 challenges that continue to negatively impact gender equity and equality. The first challenge is that of gender issues and accountability is currently subsumed within one departmental structure, instead of being addressed in an intersectional manner that prioritizes oppressed communities within each ministerial department. The second challenge is that our current systems continue to perpetuate inequity. So for example, informal labor, domestic labor, or unpaid care work under a feminist government would be valued as an important contributor to a South African economy. The third challenge affecting gender equality is the state's support and response to femicide in South Africa. Femicide is a symptom of a state that has failed to provide an environment where gender-based violence is not tolerated. And the role of a state through a feminist lens is to provide a supportive environment for survivors, to ensure that all survivors experience an efficient, respectful, and empathic service from all state-run systems. And similarly, the state would ensure that men are the primary agents for their own behavioral change, whilst providing an empowering and protected environment for women and oppressed minorities to have agency. Current models of governance fail to account for the lack of unsupportive or ineffective responses to all forms of gender-based violence. I come to my last point, which is that the role of men is necessary in order to do the work of challenging patriarchy and the oppressive behaviors that may exist amongst some of their peers. These 4 contextual factors that I've raised remain to be some of the most pressing challenges affecting gender equality. But these points also silently emphasize the key principles of feminism, which are to be humane, to be inclusive, to be accountable, and to be collaborative. And finally, as a university, we believe that gender inequity can be eradicated if there is an holistic systemic response that employs innovation, female-led entrepreneurship, and knowledge production. Thank you, Dr. Mbete.
Thank you very much for that. Can we give them all a round of applause, please, for setting things up for us? And thank you to UCT for throwing down the gauntlet, setting down a few challenges about what a feminist government should look like, what its principles should be, and the idea that it would have to be humane, inclusive, accountable, and collaborative. Now, with that context, I would now like to call upon our first speaker, who is the opening speaker for the proposition side, who will be giving an opening statement. You have 5 minutes to give us an opening statement of what your team will be proposing today. It is we decided that, we should have the guys argue our side of the, for once. So, Mr. David Kabwa, we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. You can stand there.
Very good afternoon to all who are present here today. Stand for team opposition. Proposition. In favor of the motion in the House, South Africa requires a feminist government to advance gender equity and equality across all sectors of society. Now, I will begin by defining feminism from the standpoint of team proposition. Feminism is the belief in social, economic, and political equality of the sexes. Now, for the purpose of this discussion, we are also going to frame what exactly is a feminist government. For this, we are going to look at the first feminist government in the world, the example used here being Sweden. Now, what this means is that gender equality is central to the government's priorities in decision-making as well as resource allocation. A feminist government ensures that a gender equality perspective is brought into policy making on a broad front, both nationally as well as internationally. Women and men must have the same power to shape society as well as their own lives. This is a human right, and it is a matter of democracy as well as justice. Gender equality is part of the solution to many of society's challenges, and a matter, of course, in the modern welfare state. For justice and economic development, the government's most important tool for implementing a feminist policy is gender mainstreaming, of which a gender-responsive budgeting approach is a very important component. Now, I'm going to reference the 3 R's that have been used with regards to Swedish feminist government: rights, representation, and resources. The application of the 3 R's have resulted in the objectives applied by the government with regards to ensuring an increased level of equality. And these are listed as follows. Number 1, equal division of power and influence. Women and men must have the same rights and opportunities to be active citizens and to shape the conditions for their decision making. Number 2, economic equality. Women and men must have the same opportunities and conditions with regard to paid work, which gives economic independence throughout their lives. Number 3, equal education. Women and men, girls and boys, must have the same opportunities and conditions with regards to education, study options, as well as personal development. Number 4, equal distribution of unpaid housework and provision of care. Women and men must have the same responsibility for housework and have the opportunity to give and receive care on equal terms. Number 5, equal health. Women and men, girls and boys must have the same conditions for a good health and be offered the same care on equal terms. Men's violence against women must stop. Women and men, girls and boys must have the same right and opportunity to physical integrity. Now, this context is all good and well, but above all else, it is important that we bring it home. And for this purpose, I would like to introduce the concept of intersectionality, also referred to as intersectional feminism. It is a branch of feminism which identifies how different aspects of social and political discrimination overlap with gender. Now, part of the reason why women continue to face economic discrimination and violence is due to the lack of a feminist approach in the implementation of employment equity and other gender equality policies. Yes, we do have policies and legislation in place, but there is only so much that compliance can do. We need a more radical approach in order to ensure that the reality of the everyday lives of ordinary South Africans reflect what is outlined in policy, legislation, and constitutionality. Patriarchy plays an important role in South Africa. One may argue that inequality and violence against women is due to their lack of power and influence relative to men. But the biggest standpoint of all is that it would be salacious to suggest any notion other than that in the contemporary South African context, what is sorely lacking is a feminist government approach.
Thank you very much. Great job. Sorry, I will be a very strict timekeeper because that's my job. But also, thank you so much for laying out that debate, what we've heard, for laying out the proposition side. What we've heard is that they are using as a model for this the Swedish government approach towards feminist government, focusing on the 3 R's: rights, representation, and resources, and setting out a number of areas through which they would want to have equality of men and women across the board, and equality in the approach to governance in relation to the two. What I would like to say to everyone who's following us on live stream, to our colleagues at WITS and UFS and UCT, as well as to everyone that's following us on Twitter, you are encouraged to, and of course anyone who's here in the auditorium, if you want to do it online, you are encouraged to send questions or comments to the panelists through Slido. That's sli.do, and you can either download the app or go online through their website if you would like to ask any questions or make any comments in favor of one side or the other. Okay, without further ado, I would like to call upon the opening speaker of the opposition to make her opening statement. Thanks, Sophia. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Mbete. Good afternoon. I would like to open up by asking everyone here, what is a feminist government? It's all well and good to say that we need one. However, the practicalities of this make it slightly more challenging. And I'm going to touch on one particular topic that's also been a bone of contention in our government today, and that is the idea of gender equity through through gender quotas. The Republic of South Africa holds one of the foremost constitutions in the world. It is centered around free, fair, and particularly qualitative democracy. In the interest of much needed female and also gender non-conforming equality, gender quotas in government have always been kind of the looked-to solution, the so-called band-aid over the wound of centuries of inequality and gender persecution. The notion that if we force women into the public realm, that people will eventually learn to like the idea is both anti-productive as well as undemocratic, and is therefore actually unconstitutional. We cannot force feminism on a government. Our point is that it needs to come from a grassroots level. So the advent of gender quotas has come in a wave of gender equality initiatives which allow women to receive preference over men by the simple virtue of being a woman. And, you know, I always make the point that it's convenient for ANC leaders to turn around after the latest cabinet reshuffle and say that it has managed to secure a female majority in its primary ministers, thus feminism is solved, when it has been made evident time and time again since the early 2000s that women have been given positions of power with no meritocratic election process whatsoever, and this is a problem. It also undermines the fact that in order to have an acclaimed and legitimate state with functioning institutions, wherein feminism can actually thrive, states need to employ a competent workforce. So it also implies that meritocracy is simply an unimportant bureaucratic process which hinders the harsh reality of nepotism that is rife within our South African system today. Additionally, although gender quotas ensure that there's high female participation, it doesn't always guarantee that women would be appointed to the highest tiers of government or positions of power. For example, the ANC, which does enforce gender quotas, a 50-50 gender quota, only 1 in 5 of their top positions is actually occupied by a woman. So what does that say about practical feminism within the government structure and within government feminism? It cannot be simply a symbolic thing. It needs to come from the bottom. In terms of affirmative action helping women to uplift themselves financially, we've also seen time and time again that systems like triple BEE and other forms of positive discrimination only help the top tiers financially of society. And then filling the quotas in order to somehow gain legitimacy is equally anti-feminist for many reasons, but I'll mention 2 at this time. The first is that even if every second seat in parliament is occupied by a woman, the fact is that there is no standardized methodology of election in order to occupy a seat, which means that women who are qualified and competent enough to do an effective job, which there are many of, obviously, will not know whether their position is based on merit or to fulfill a statistic that would make the country proud. This leads to the second reason. Feminism is, at its basis, it aims to achieve gender parity and equality, but this is not through having some surface sense of achievement in numbers, which is what quotas aim to achieve, but rather through legitimacy. The perceived idea is that women hold positions of power because of their gender, and if that is the case, they'll never be taken seriously in the workplace or in the country. So when we talk about a feminist government, what does that actually mean? Are the women who are in places of power there because they are legitimately qualified to be there? And there are countless examples of the opposite. Sorry, can I finish? Yes. Thank you. The reality is that gender equality needs to come paired with the capacity for growth from grassroots. Although it's a harder path, cultural hegemony and patriarchy needs to be addressed before true gender equality can be realized. Thank you.
Whew. Okay, so some fighting words and some strident words from the opposition, basically making the point that you cannot impose gender equality from the top through legislation or through quotas, that it has to be organic, it has to build from the grassroots, from the bottom up, and that you risk undermining your ability to do that by the backlash and the unintended consequences of having an imposed gender policy or gender equality from the top to the bottom. So you all have the opportunity now to comment. Well, no, firstly, I would like to engage with the speakers myself, just to get a bit more of a sense of where they are going with this. So with the proposition side, you say that having a feminist foreign policy or feminist policy as a whole would necessarily address issues around both resource distribution in the areas of health and education. It would provide a greater, it would be expected to provide greater opportunities for all genders in terms of economic opportunity. And these are all, one could say, areas or issues that are in the public sphere. But then you speak of having parity or equality in household work or in the distribution of household work. And we know that the work of the household really is that unpaid labor is one of the greatest constraints to women succeeding in the world. How would you regulate that as a government? That is the private sphere. How would you be able to, as a feminist government, regulate the equal distribution of household labor?
All right, thank you so much for the question. Right, so we would need to start by defining exactly what is being referred to when speaking about household labor. Now, household labor is obviously the labor that is done in the household, but it is also household labor pertaining to those who are working within the domestic sphere. One of the biggest concerns that have been raised is the regulation with regards to even the smallest gender disparities. For example, a very contemporary example always used is a gardener who is working in one house. In the same house, there is a domestic worker. Now, oftentimes what you will find is a disparity in the wages that are given to both of these individuals. Now, when we speak about regulation, we are specifically referring to this public sphere. Reason being, we're talking about governance, we are speaking about policy. Minimum wage is a policy that affects those who work at the grassroots level, those who are domestic workers and those who are gardeners also. Now, in that regard, what we are referring to specifically is people who fall underneath that bracket. Reason being, to a large extent, they are very heavily marginalized. And if they are not marginalized, they are often not even given the smallest consideration. What we spoke about is also inclusivity in decision-making and resource allocation. And this is a prominent issue and needs to be addressed with regards to a feminist government.
Thank you very much. Okay. And to the opposition side, do you have any comments or responses that you'd want to give to that? Or yes.
Okay. So, for instance, I'm just going to quote Sheryl Sandberg in her book, Lean In. I don't know if any of you have read it. It's quite good. But one of the comments that she makes is about making your partner a real partner. So, because she's also, advancing, feminism. And she says that one of the main issues is that in the home, a woman has 2 or 3 jobs. She has the job that she goes to at the office, but she also has another 2 or 3 jobs in the household. So in terms of making your partner a real partner, you've addressed something very important, but you haven't really addressed that particular issue. How would you tell a person or a man who's very, very cultural and sees a woman's role in a very particular way, how would you regulate that? I don't see how that would be possible.
Good evening, guests. I think the premise of the feminism approach in terms of governance speaks to the fact that it's actually a collaboration between men and women. And usually at times people perceive feminism as a woman-driven approach or a woman-driven project, but it's not. True feminism is the inclusion of both men and women to ensure that both receive the same rights, the same resources, and to ensure that they're all represented in all those spheres. Now, the problem that we've had in our society is that we've got everything to do with compliance, but nothing that conscientizes the everyday man of the role that he has to play in the modern day. And this is why, even with the Sweden approach, you see how they, as men as well, take ownership of the term feminism, where all 23 of them say, we are all feminists within this government. And it goes across the board because people want to see their leaders take the lead and take the baton first. So when you look at the cultural context, education does need to be invested in because culture is dynamic. It doesn't mean that things cannot change, but only if people understand what the definition of feminism is and why it is important for us to ensure that men, even within the household, understand that. And this is where conversations need to happen, even within the cultural dynamic space. To regulate that, takes time. But you first have to get people's buy-in. You first have to get people to understand why we need to take this approach. Because now we're both breadwinners. Who must now do all the cleaning and all the cooking? What happens if I come home at 8 o'clock and you came home at 5? Are you going to wait for me to come cook the pap? Or are you going to wake up and make them eat yourself? So we also need to get to a point where traditional men need to also open up their minds and realize that the times are changing and that we live in a modern world. And I think there's a lot that we can actually do with that if the government takes a feminist approach.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now to the opposition team. You've spoken a lot about the practicalities of what it would actually mean in practice to have a feminist government. You've also spoken about some of the consequences of the gender equality legislation or gender policies that we already have in South Africa, and where they're not actually always, they're not working in the way that they should be working. And so you've emphasized changing from the bottom up and putting in place and encouraging cultural change. How exactly should we do that outside of a government-driven or a government-led process? Yes, culture is dynamic, but it often takes a long time to change. It's a slow and difficult process. Will we not be waiting forever if we use your approach?
Okay. Okay, so the process would be long. Yes, I do agree. But, okay, I have another quote. The Swedish ambassador to the United States, that's Karen Olofsdotter. She said that we are an extremely egalitarian society from the beginning. So this was a natural progression, right? So the idea of taking a feminist approach and enforcing it at macro level, that's not what Sweden did, right? They have always been egalitarian. They have always been a society that focused on equality. So for us to think that we can just come and take a model that they've been working on for generations and just implement it at the top and say government enforce, I don't see how that is going to work. So our approach may take a while, but the reality is that's what happened with Sweden. They also took their time creating an egalitarian society from grassroots level, and then only they evolved into a feminist government. So that's our position.
Okay. Does the proposition have a yes?
I just want to make 2 points. Similarly, when you look at the United States and their 2016 presidential election, Hillary Clinton was, in her campaign, forced feminism. And it essentially blew up in her face because, well, she didn't win. And also because people didn't vote for her purely on the basis that she was a woman. Obviously not all people, but a significant number of people did. Additionally, I would like to mention a debate that I watched yesterday about whether Islam is a peaceful religion. And, you know, the argument was that, you know, it's oppressive to women as a religion. But you see in countries that practice Sharia, Islamic law, that women who are educated to the point where they can actually think for themselves, so past the point of kind of primary, this is how you read and this is how you equate 1 + 1 = 2, you can tell as a woman that you are not being treated as men are. And this is often something that we find in countries that don't necessarily have good education systems, where the inequality, both through gender and through social discrimination such as poverty, where education levels make a huge difference to how people in the home perceive themselves. A man is born poor, but if he is educated to know that he doesn't have to be, he can change his life. Similarly, if a woman is born in an oppressive society and she can educate herself to know that that's not necessarily something she wants, she can make that difference. it won't necessarily be through a parliament full of women. It will be through one woman who has read a book and who has decided for herself that that is not a life she wants to lead.
Thank you.
Sophia, there's just, I just want you to firstly clarify what is this bottom that you talk about so that we can all understand the context that you're referring to. And when you say it should start from grassroots level, which garden are we using? How does that look like? In terms of, you made a comment in your opening that said that it is a known thing that some women are put into positions based on their gender. But for many years, historically, it's also been a known thing that a lot of unqualified men have also been put in positions of power and authority without having the necessary qualifications. Ultimately, we are sitting here with stats that say over 80% of women graduates and similar amounts to men with less than a matric or a matric. Now, the reality is, if we're going to take an incremental approach and we're going to sit back and wait for another 25 years into this democracy, when will we see the results and change? Because if you say incremental, we should wait for incremental change to happen, what does that look like? And who becomes accountable and responsible for that? And when you look at the feminist approach, you look at the fact that it allows us to hold government to accountability, and hopefully that will transcend into the private sector as well.
Thanks. You can respond to that if you want to, briefly.
Sure. Well, there were a few. In terms of what is grassroots level, it is exactly what Mr. Levy had said, which is in the household. That is the grassroots. That is where people are born into. That is the family dynamic is the thing that breeds a society, essentially, and breeds the values of that particular society. So that is the grassroots level. It's not a particular kind of household. It is simply the household itself. Secondly, what you were saying in terms of... wait, hang on. Can you rephrase, can you ask me your second question again?
Was it in terms of the comment that you said, that it's known fact that women...
Yes, okay, sorry. All right. So it's a known fact that women are put into positions of power purely based on nepotism. Yes, it's the same as men, but we have always known that as women, we have something more to prove, because the patriarchy has said that we are not capable of being in positions of power. So if we kind of take the same approach as the nepotism that men have received for centuries, how does that make us any better? Or any different? And then what is incremental change in its, so for your third point, incremental change is not necessarily incremental. And I think we've seen that with the advent of more and more technology and more access to information, more and more people, and this is why we have a third wave feminism, because it's not word of mouth anymore. We have the capability to pick up a piece of technology or to have access to information that says that Sweden has a particular foreign policy or a particular governmental policy that advocates for women. And so this is why we're having this discussion today. It didn't take us 100 years to get here from when we read about Sweden's foreign policy. So it's not necessarily incremental anymore. I think it's going to be exponential.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, to our colleagues at WITS and UCT, UFS, you've heard the debate so far and what each side has said. Some real divisions. It seems to me that there's a generalized agreement, there's a general agreement that the position of women particularly needs to change, but that our approach to gender of all kinds needs to change in our country. There's just a difference about how and whether having a feminist government would achieve that. So anyone who would like to start? Shall we ask UCT this time to start with your comments or questions?
Okay. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So basically from UCT, we began with our understanding of what is feminist, because I think that influences how we tackle this particular motion. right? And we have the position that we basically believe in feminism that believes in intersectionality as a tool of analysis. And intersectionality is the idea that our identities are multifaceted. The idea that the racism I face is sexualized and the sexism I face is racialized, right? And so it's a tool of analysis to understand how the different systems of oppression reinforce each other and create a much bigger, sophisticated system. So having this outlook on society will ensure that the outlook on policy is one that considers the various population, how the various population groupings are affected by it. And at this point, I want to state that feminism is not necessarily only about gender. It's about other parts of our identity as well, right? So considering things like immigration, considering things like ableism and people's mental health, those kinds of things. And so a feminist government is one that looks at all parts of our identity, not just the gender aspect of it. And this is much better than the majority versus minority approach, which is currently democracy kind of moves us in that direction, which requires us to weigh up the rights of different groupings against each other. But rather we need to find a Pareto efficient outcome, which is an economic concept. I'm an economic student, that relates to our broader social welfare. And that socially optimal outcome is one where you improve the welfare of one group in society without making the other group worse off. And so this is where the idea of feminism meets economics, and why economics requires feminist thought as policymakers in order to address persisting problems such as high inequality, unemployment, and inflation, which are the responsibility of the government or the states. And so, for instance, data tells us that the people who engage in most in informal trading and informal sectors in the economy are women. This can be explained by a historic lack of opportunities and educational attainment. And this problem arises when the work that women are forced to do by oppressive systems is not recognized as legitimate work in society. But society is structured in such a way that without improving your education or your general experience, the relative productivity of women is higher in household productions or in professions that do not necessarily require formal education, such as sex work. And so household production and sex work have historically not been included in the calculation of gross domestic product because they exist in the informal market. As South African economists, we have failed to quantify household production in such a way that it recognizes the effort that people put into it, which, when it arguably derives the same utility for the household or society as traditional paid work does. And this is particularly evident in how low the average wage for the domestic worker is in South Africa in comparison to other countries in the world where the market is more formalized for household production. Domestic work, household production, and sex work need to be formalized and structured so that we raise the average wage of those who engage in those markets, but also absorb those who do this work into the employment rate of statistics of the country, and further empower those who work in those sectors, the majority of whom happen to be women in the South African context. And we need such policy positions to be taken by the government so that we advance gender equity and equality. This is one reason why we believe that a feminist government would strengthen our democracy. Our understanding of democracy is that as a system, it requires the buy-in of citizens for it to operate efficiently and reach its ideals. Currently, the state of our democracy in South Africa is characterized by elections fever, right? Where the participation of citizens begins and ends with national, provincial, or local government elections. Citizens are disengaged and do not feel inspired to exercise their agency to contribute to democratic processes. Could this be because citizens do not feel part of the work of government? That perhaps the work of government does not directly address the needs of the citizens, or that they do, or do they not see themselves in the government that is doing the work itself? Perhaps citizens in general have lost faith. A feminist government is by definition intersectional, and that would mean cognizance of how all of our different identities intersect in South Africa and in our society in general. On one hand, it would, on a superficial level, it would increase representation which could inspire citizens to take more ownership of the democratic processes beyond elections, thus strengthening participative democracy. But on the other hand, it would shift the thinking of those in the government itself, or those tasked with leading, to not only look at what they believe is strategically more pressing in terms of policy or in terms of programs, but rather that people would look into the broader scope of policy and the national scale. We have seen this kind of shift in thinking in countries such as Canada and Sweden, who have adopted feminist thoughts in part of their work. Therefore, a feminist government will not only strengthen and deepen democracy, but maximize our ability to realize gender equity and equality in society. Because there is a political will that reaches past rhetoric and electioneering. It's greater than that. It's attached to experience and livelihood.
Okay.
As I draw to a close, I want to agree with the opposition that gender quotas are not a feminist policy position because they open a way for minority groups to be tokenized, satisfy an ideal that is not feminist. Because feminism by definition requires a deep interrogation of our systems, and we agree that gender quotas are a very shallow solution. But we must acknowledge that the role of government is not limited to policy implementation, but rather that if democracy was operating efficiently, we would see citizens being part and parcel of government. Government, as people we consider to be the leaders of society, are responsible for sharpening. Yes?
Thank you, UCT. You were closing and then you were talking again.
No, I'm still closing. Give me 2 seconds.
You can finish your sentence.
So basically the point that I was trying to make is that government as the leaders of society are responsible for sharpening the tools of analysis in society in general and are responsible for the national level of consciousness. And government has the resources to begin nationwide campaigns of awareness and consciousness in a way that an individual could never. That is why the responsibility of grassroots work lies with the government and not with other organizations.
Thank you.
By definition.
Thank you very much for that very detailed contribution from UCT. Two things that I'd want to pick out from here is the idea that a feminist approach would need to be all-encompassing and would need to be tied. There's two things that have been mentioned from UCT that haven't necessarily come up in the debate so far. The first one is the link of a feminist government to the democratic process itself, that it should be a mechanism to deepen democracy from just being about elections. But the second thing is the kinds of work that women take part in, predominantly so reproductive work in the home, but also the first mention of sex work that we've had here, and the role that sex work plays for many not just women, but people of gender non-conforming people as well, and needing to recognize that as legitimate work. Okay, I'd now like to ask Wits, please, can you guys... We'd said you guys had 5 minutes, so don't take the UCT example.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think we're muted, they muted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
I just want to make a small point. I think that if we're making an argument against gender equality, I think we need to also explore whether equality itself is possibly a myth. As part of exploring whether gender equality more specifically is problematic. I think in our lived reality, the important point I want to just contribute to the discussion is not to lose sight of, there is the debate on multiple identities, and us recognizing our multiple identities, but I don't think we must lose sight of the overall structural nature of our societies. I mean, if you look at, for example, Swedish societies in which there tends to be more forms of equality, those have tended to be more social democratic in nature. It becomes very problematic in a society where we have deepening positions of neoliberalism as well as rampant forms of capitalism and inequality to imagine gender equality. So how are parties in relationships supported to be able to live gender equality? So the notion of equality, gender equality cannot be divorced from the notion of equality, which cannot be divorced from the overall social structural environment which is required. So I would argue that, in fact, it is merely an idealistic notion. Equality is merely idealistic unless we tackle the real social realities. In this country, we have made fundamental errors. We've privatized many social services, which we have restructured universities. In the processes of restructuring, we actually had, where we had child support, for example, for academics, for working mothers, we had removed those in the processes of universities being restructured. It is interesting now that we've gone through a period of insourcing, and now also we're going through a period of having to consider if we want to live gender equality and if we want to see the development of the Black professoriate, what does that mean for the support we provide women academics with? Yeah. So I think I just wanted to bring that dimension into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So Wits there has problematized this notion of equality and brought in the debate and the question on the power structures on which our society is built, both the political power structures. We've spoken quite a bit about cultural power structures, but also the economic power structures that shape how we relate to each other and the options that we have got within society. I would just like to say we are getting lots of feedback from people who are joining us online. Remember that when you join Slido, the password, the code for this debate is hashtag B446. Hashtag B446 for people that are joining us online. I'm going to get to your comments. And yeah, so finally, please, to UFS, would you like to weigh in on the debate? Please follow the example of Wits.
We'll try to keep our comments very short because there's a few of us that would like to make comments. So mine is one that can be answered by either side. I'm concerned that this discussion is still happening under the context of the current state system as we have it now, one that focuses and centralizes around power, when we know that power often corrupts, power often promotes self-interest. So the concern here is that we've seen it even with the transitioning of the old white government to the new Black one, that very, very few things changed during that shift. So how does having a feminist government tackle this issue? Are we not just playing a numbers game? How will we ever be able to actually achieve equality if we don't deconstruct and quite possibly even dismantle the state system as it exists now?
And my question is to the proposing team. I would like to find out from you, through efforts of women and feminist women in particular, advocating and lobbying for decades for something like the Abortion Act of 1996, how do we in a feminist government imagine educating those of us who have internalized patriarchy and those who are not conscious amongst us, and therefore creating a sensitization so that we do not become hindrances to the very policies that we have advocated for? And in that system, how do we imagine, for example, something like termination of pregnancies that is now sort of hindered through implementation by perhaps healthcare workers, such as nurses, who hold negative attitudes towards abortion, such as for religious or cultural purposes, and therefore become impediments to the access to the healthcare system, for example. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
My question goes to the team that agrees with us having a feminist government. With the current governance structure, we already have structures or bodies that advocate for women's rights, for women, inequalities, structures like the Women's Ministry and Gender Commission. But now, these structures are either ineffective, or they're not seen, or they're just underpaid, or it's simply ignored with the current governance structure. So if we do move towards a feminist governance, what is it that we do first? Do we focus on those current existing structures and making sure that they do get enough attention, they are paid, and then they have effect on people? Or do we just, I don't know, take a total approach of taking over the government while neglecting the current systems that I believe the reason why they are existing is they stem from the ideology of feminism, they stem from advancing the women's rights and whatnot. So moving forward, what do we do? Do we give them attention, or do we just have a total takeover of feminism in the governance?
Okay, thank you.
Then I want to ask about a really important thing that we haven't been having a discussion about, and that is, how do we address very toxic and patriarchal men and boys within our society? So even if we argue that grassroots feminism is favorable to a feminist government, those grassroots activists are going to be fighting against a lot of men, and especially men in government who have power. And in this entire conversation, we need to do something about toxic and patriarchal men, because patriarchy doesn't come out of nowhere. I think it's birthed and perpetuated by men in particular. So I just want to hear in terms of what's our response to men? What do we do?
Okay, sure. Those are a lot of questions, but thank you very much. I think that it's good that we've had questions directly to the teams. You will be able to respond to them in your closing statement, so you can integrate them into your closing remarks. Okay, now I know I've seen lots of nodding and itching and hands trying to get up. The audience here at the University of Pretoria at the Future Africa campus, we're going to take 3 comments. I've seen hands shoot up. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and then 4, because I like your glasses. Okay.
Good evening to everyone. So my comment, which has a question mark, is in terms of implementing a feminist government. I mean, before 94, we had an apartheid government, and a lot of people weren't certain how that was going to go. But after 25 years, we can actually say
line has been around this idea that, what can we do to start changing things? So what's the role of the men who are already in leadership? How can they be influenced in order to get us to the point of having a feminist government? There was another question. Yes, please introduce yourself. I didn't ask the last speaker, but just let us know who you are and where you're from.
Good evening, my name is Nomthandaza Mahlangu. I am coming from the Businesswomen's Association of South Africa. My comment is to the opposition. I strongly believe that the suggestion that this idea should come from a grassroots level, being from the homes, fails to consider the context in which we are talking. This is South Africa. We have culture and tradition that inherently imposes patriarchy, and I think it's the least practical solution when we're looking at what we're talking about today.
Okay, so the question there being about how would we be able to affect households given the impact of culture. I suppose linked to that, and this is a question that's come from our online participants to both teams, is how is it possible for government to influence deep cultural contexts, right? So some thinking about that would be welcome. And yes, we've got on this side.
Thank you. My name is Christina van Straten. I'm a student at the University of Pretoria. Mr. Cover, this is addressed at you. We have seen both the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Coupe, as well as SRC President David Kabwa vote in favor of a feminist government, right? Is this not hypocritical considering the fact that UP's female residences are accountable to far stricter rules than their male counterparts, e.g. visiting hours? So my question is, how can you advocate for a feminist government when the institution which you govern lacks feminist policies?
Oh. Okay, so to the two men in charge at the university, and actually we've had a similar question come from online saying, how can UP advocate for a feminist government when Tux Res, which is I think a co-ed res, has stricter rules for females than for men? So what does that say about equality? I'll leave that to, yes. A question, there was one more question. Where's the mic? Over here, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kopano. I'm a third-year PPE student, Politics, Philosophy, and Economics, and I'm head of marketing at Tux FM. I want to ask sort of to both sides of the debate. The proposition in the beginning spoke of Sweden's feminist policy. Now, 3 weeks ago, I was in a room with the head of commission from the Swedish embassy, and the one thing that she said was that there are those 3 R's, but reality is the 4th one. That I think maybe you haven't considered, because even if we teach at schools, in universities, wherever we go, there is still households, which is also now going on to the opposition, that perpetuate rape culture, that perpetuate patriarchy, and that boys will be boys, and that girls stay in the kitchen. And also then, to a question to the op, do we really have time? If resolutions were drafted in 1325, I think, about women, peace, and security in wars, and only now people are starting to take that seriously, but a lot of women have died in the process. A lot of civilian women and children have died in the process. Do we have time? Because you want to start at the grassroots level. Malala Yousafzai was shot in, her head because of her grassroots level feminism. So do we really want to be shot? Yeah.
Okay, so two questions there. That the 4th R in the Swedish case is reality, and reality does not always match the fancy, nice-sounding policies of government. And the second point to the opposition: do we actually have time do we have time to wait for households and for our cultures to catch up? One thing that I'm going to put out there for the closing speakers that's come from someone who's engaging with us online is that there has been a lot about the way in which we've spoken about feminism. Certainly, I know the way that I have, that has been pretty gender binary. And so the question is the feminism in this debate, does it consider gender non-conforming peoples, and how do we engage with all of these other facets of the debate? And so with that, I am going to ask our closing speaker from the proposition to come up, Mane Boikanyo, to come up to provide the final remarks for her team. As with the others, you have 5 minutes.
rights, representation, and resources, we'll come back to reality soon, shared equally amongst men and women, not just as a ticking box exercise for compliance, but a reality through a feminist government approach. That is something that I'd like to experience in my lifetime as a black woman in South Africa. SA requires a feminist government approach to advance gender equity and equality across all sectors of society. And this should be a combined effort, not only by women, but women, men, girls, boys, and the private sector. If we are not proactive and radical in our approach, we will convene here in the next 25 years, hopefully waiting for another incremental change. I've realized and lived through gender inequality all my life. My granny was only able to be a tea girl, a domestic worker, or a cleaner. By virtue of that, my mom didn't have an opportunity for an education. But all the majority of the men in my family managed to get a matric. What does that say about our society? Does it say that we still wait for a quota system to be implemented? I stand here as a third-generation member of the family, and only a sum of that gender equality being realized. The voices of women mattering only when votes are required and we have to pay taxes is unfair when we are 51.3% of the population in this country. We go and we vote. We pay our taxes. Why can we not be included when it comes to making decisions that affect our rights and ensure that we are represented and that adequate resources are provided and that we're not a by the way project within the country and that we're not a ticking box exercise? I think one thing, just to touch again, the one aspect of feminism that my partner over here alluded to is the concept of intersectional feminism, a movement recognizing that barriers to gender equality vary across and according to other aspects of women's identity, including age, race, ethnicity, class, and religion, and striving to address a diverse spectrum of women's issues. So when we propose a feminism approach, we're not proposing that, oh, let's just be pro-women. We're proposing that let's unpack and deal with all the fundamental issues that affect us in terms of race, identity, age, ethnicity, class, and religion. Only then will we realize success. When it comes to the grassroots level, it's very dangerous for us to say it has to come from a grassroots level. How do we measure that? How do we ensure that we get through to the society? But if we get a government that is pro-feminism and that buys into the concept in every aspect and ensures that women are represented, it is our right to be represented. Because we're also tired of being part of the quota systems. We go to school, we study, and we also add value to this economy and the society. With that being said, South Africa requires a feminist government to advance gender equity and equality across all sectors of society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those closing remarks and who came in right on time. And I would now like to call upon the closing speaker for the opposition side, Ms. Uleboheng Slid.
Okay, so just to close off, I would like to start off with the point that I think we've forgotten the fact that cultures evolve over time, right? And as Africans, we have a very particular culture and a very particular way of seeing the world. And we find ourselves in a real dilemma because we find ourselves being thrust into a Western cultures and ideologies that we have not yet fully wrapped our minds around, right? So we have to remember that everything takes evolution, it takes time. So even as we've said, oh, it's going to take so long to do it from a grassroots level, the reality is cultures evolve over time. Even patriarchy, we kept our patriarchal societies because they served us in some way at some point. but we found ourselves in a position where patriarchy no longer serves us, but culturally it's still implemented, right? So finding ourselves evolving to the point where we can actually actively implement feminism from a macro level, from a governmental level, will take time. So that's just to address some of the questions that I got, okay? But just to end off, I want us to end off with a definition of what equality actually is. So equality doesn't mean that people are the same, right? Equality understands that every single one of us in this room is different. We're not the same. But equality means that we have equal value. Now I want you to think about the term value, right? Value has both an intangible and a tangible component. So as a woman, if you're seen as someone of equal value, it means that you are perceived as someone of equal value, but you are also bringing something to the table of equal value. So as women now, I'm sure a lot of us in this room are highly educated. We have, degrees and master's degrees and PhDs and all of that. But the reality is, even though the tangible is there, the perception of our value is still not there. And perception is not something that you can generate by government saying, do this for women, put women in these positions. That's something that you have to start with in the home. It's not something you can generate at macro level. Men can't be told to value us when they're already 30, 40, 50 years old. It has to happen at grassroots level, okay? So that's very important. So just to end off, okay, where am I going to end off? Let's have a look here. Okay, so the problem is not about the different policies that we have. The problem comes in with how men and women are socialized from an early age. That's why we're saying the grassroots level is the issue. It has to do with how we are socialized. For instance, even as women, a friend of mine told me, I want to bring in a little bit of anecdotal evidence, I'm sure the ladies can relate. A friend of mine told me, for instance, that she was in a relationship with one young man. And this one day, she had the conversation with him. She said, okay, if you and I got married and our child woke up in the middle of the night and was crying, who must wake up and change that diaper, right? And he looked at her with the most shocked face and said, of course it's you. You're a woman, right? So those are the societies that we come from. So trying to enforce this at macro level will not work. So as long as it will take, we have to give ourselves the time as Africans within the Western context, give ourselves the time to gradually work towards a feminist government within the context of South Africa. Thank you.
Okay, so you have heard from both sides. And so you're going to vote again. My counters. Yes. Okay. So those of you who agree with the argument that South Africa requires a feminist government to advance gender equity and equality across all sectors of a society, please raise your hands. Okay. All right, are we done? Thank you. Those of you who disagree with the motion, please raise your hands. Counters? Ooh, that's interesting. Can we also get the online votes coming through? Come give me the numbers. It needs to be announced. Okay. So online, when we started the debate, and we asked people online if they agreed that South Africa needs a feminist government, by the end, the final tally was 90% said yes, South Africa does need a feminist government. After the debate, the number of people that agree is 81%. So the online tally has changed. There is a 9-point difference, which seems quite favorable for the opposition team. And then when we started, we had 44 people who were for the motion of South Africa needs a feminist government, and we had 11 people who were against. Well, there's more people in the room now. So after the debate, there were 60 people who were for and 25 people who were against. And so that works out pretty equal. What's the difference? Jasuloba. What are the calculate the numerical difference between? Thank you. It's very tight. So on the online vote, the opposition team took it. On the auditorium vote, who has the biggest? It's almost equal. That's. How much did the You see what happens when you try to get a bunch of politics students to calculate? Okay, so before the debate, 25% of the people that were voting said they did not want a feminist government, and that increased to 41% by the end of the debate. And so, does that mean that the opposition has had the biggest increase? What about the proposition?
Are you answering?
No.
That went from, yes, 75% to 50. No. Please bring me the numbers. Okay, so somebody over here is going to do the maths while we call up Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe to let us know what the way forward is going to be. Thank you so much. This has been a really active debate. There's things on both sides, I think, that were really important. I think that something that came across particularly from the discussion with the other universities was that when we think of a feminist government, I keep saying foreign policy because I'm teaching foreign policy this year, but when we speak this semester, when we speak of a feminist government, we really do need to think about changing the way in which we think of governance and power relations altogether. And it's not just about equity or having particular policies, but rather it's about transforming the way in which people relate to each other and how people relate to the government altogether in our society. Hi. Are you guys going?
Yes, I just want to find out. Yes, I just want to find out if that was a question for us.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't a question.
Was it for us?
No, it wasn't a question for you. It was just a final comment. We're now going to ask Dr. Moloi-Motsepe to tell us what the way forward is. We want to have this as a continued engagement, and we're going to hear a bit more about it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mbete. I think when Prof. Kupe welcome to you all. I was thinking, you mentioned that your boss is here. And your boss happens to be somebody that went to university with me more than 30 years ago. So I'm really pleased to see you here, Futhi, and Dr. Futhi Mtoba, and our ambassador, Fikile, as well. And this is what universities do. They are not just places where we learn and study. It's places where we form long-term partnerships and friendships. So thank you very much. My goodness, I never thought it was going to turn out like this. I really have to thank you for the work that you've put in making this debate so lively, so informative. I'm sure all of us have learned so much more than what we imagined, what we knew around issues of gender equality. This is our the first series of debates that the foundation hopes to collaborate with universities on. And in my view, this was really significant, and it was a very good debate. So what we're going to do is we will go away. We will get feedback from yourselves, from all the universities, University of Free State. Thank you very much for your participation. UCT, as well as Wits University. It's wonderful to see you all, and thank you for educating me. So we will get feedback from all the universities and all the people that were involved, and from our audiences, as to how you see these debates going forward. I'd really love to hear what your thoughts are and what we need to improve so that we can plan for the next ones. So our plan was to have these every quarter, and we would have different topics, that affect us as society in South Africa, or even global issues, and we can talk about these issues. We started the first one around gender equality because this is Women's Month, and I'm really excited that we have so much to take forward to whatever department and committees and government that deal with gender equality, but not just government. We need to address business and civil society as well. Now, this being a place of learning, I just want to see if you're still all up. And those of you, and I know you're all very sharp, I had a problem that I was trying to solve whilst I was a student at Wits University, and it was around a man who was in a car accident with his son. The man died, father and son. The father died, and the child was rushed to an emergency center. Operation was supposed to be performed, and the surgeon turned around and said, "I can't operate on this child, he's my son." University of Learnings and Learners and everything. How do you explain that? Okay, you raised your arm, so I'm very excited. I'm going to give it to the lady with the
doctor is his mother.
Oh, there's... Okay, you were going to say that, I know. So the answer is the surgeon is the mother. And this actually speaks to your friend's boyfriend saying, it's about us also and our own biases. We need to change our mindsets around issues of gender equality. So thank you to both teams, and thank you to the audience, and we will definitely come back to you on how we're going to move forward with this. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks so much, Dr. Moloi Mutsipe. I think it's fascinating that there were still people confused, right, 30 years later, about who the surgeon would be in relation to the boy. we have the final tally in, and it's remarkable. So before the vote that took place before in this room, the yes vote, so people that wanted South Africa to have a feminist government, carried it off by 75%. So it was 75% voted yes, 25% voted no. After the debate, 58% voted yes, and 42% voted no. So you have a 17 percentage difference, which means that the opposition clearly managed to convince people that the idea of having a feminist government is a bit more complicated than we would like to think. But congratulations to the opposition for carrying the debate. And congratulations to the proposition for giving us a lot to engage with and for really arguing your side very passionately and very powerfully. I would like us all to please give our speakers a round of applause. Please give yourselves a round of applause for being such a wonderful audience. And give our fellow colleagues at UFS, UCT, and WITS a round of applause. Thank you so much. We have written everything up from the debate, and so we will be able to share with you. Thank you so much to our scribe for your hard work. We'll be able to share with you the results of the debate and what a record of what was said and what came out of here. And we hope to have many more such engagements with you. Thank you very much for your patience and for being with us tonight. Have a great night. Travel home safely, and we'll see you again. Cheers.